some Zoom housekeeping type stuff. You know, we try to keep our videos, except for the presenters, we'll turn our videos off when they get started here, so to save bandwidth, so prevent any lagging. And if you have questions, please put them into the chat. So let's practice our chatting over here. Let's see. I'll go to everyone and say good morning. But if you have questions along the way, please type them into the chat box. I will be collecting those questions and we'll answer them at the end all together. The presentation, ladies, what do you think? About an hour? Or are we going to go a whole 2 hours talking about foodscaping?
We could talk all day. I think we're at about an hour. Okay,
so yeah, after about an hour, the presentation should go about an hour. We will answer questions, and then we're just going to open it up to, you know, any questions you got related to. I mean, we can keep talking foods. We can talk roses, whatever you want.
You can eat roses.
That's right. There's actually roses down in the veg heads garden, aren't there?
Mm-hmm. And lots of the fruit we eat are in the rose family, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Blackberries.
Apples, cherries, blackberries. Oh, let's see. Let's name them all.
Plums.
Plums, peaches.
Mm-hmm. It's a big family.
What else we got? That's right. Oh, that's right. I got to be on mute duty. Any questions? Good morning to you all. Yep, there's apple.
Mm-hmm.
Cherries. Let's see. Yeah, in the chat box, let's type our favorite rose family food.
I'm with Keith. The cherries.
And
yeah, I wish we could grow cherries here.
Yeah, when I was younger, I lived in Virginia, Western Virginia. And we had a huge cherry tree. It was a cherry tree. It was the tree that we had it was so big and like no one really took care of it. It was just a big tree that we nailed the basketball hoop to. That's what I would use as the post for my basketball hoop. And the cherries would just fall and it was great. Peggy McDonald picked, Roselle, but wait a second, Peggy, wait a second. Back up. Rose family. I knew Peggy.
It's the Malvaceae, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Same with sweet potatoes.
And okra.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Wait, sweet potatoes.
And
no,
cotton.
Sweet potatoes are morning glory.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Rachel, we'll come back and we'll talk to Rachel maybe about maybe that'll be another presentation about your food family game.
Oh yeah, you're right. I was thinking in part of it we have the mixed taxonomy part, and so I was thinking Malvaceae is in there, but it's okra, not and what is the sweet potato one?
Morning glory, Convolvulaceae.
Convolvulaceae, yeah.
All right, well, we're at 10:01. Welcome, everyone. We got about 27 folks on the Zoom here, so welcome again to Zoomland. For those that just got in, we will, once the presenters get started, if we can all turn off our video, we'll let them take all the bandwidth for the video. I will be checking to make sure everyone is muted so we don't have any distractions. And if you have questions, please type those into the chat box. I will be kind of collecting those as they come, and we will kind of make sure we get to ask the presenters those questions at the end. Mm-hmm. So I think with that, I will let them have the Zoom screen. So welcome, Rachel Mathis and Janice Petrowski.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Rachel Mathis. I'm the horticulture program assistant here in Leon County, and we got Janice, one of our veg heads, and a master gardener volunteer here.
Yeah, I've been a master gardener for about 10 years, and I'm still learning about food forests and foodscaping and actually all plants. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Let's see. There we go. So what is a food forest? You can see here, it doesn't look like your typical rows of crop. So what is it?
Yeah, this is the food forest at the extension office, the Bedsheds Food Forest.
Mhm.
That's in the springtime about a year ago.
All right. So a food forest is also called a forest garden, and they can be used interchangeably. It's just potato, potato, but it's a diverse planting of edible plants that mimics a layered forest ecosystem.
Yeah, and they're relatively new to the U.S. This is something we've only heard about in the last few years, but in the tropics, they've been existing for millennia when people who lived near the jungle and would forage would move plants to where they lived, and they created edible forests right around them. And it's not about filling your space up with edible plants, but about growing them like a forest or woodland does. That's how they've survived since forests began. No rows, no chemicals, only moisture from rain and nearby water sources. Recycled leaves and deadfall provide nutrition, and they're more sustainable and low maintenance.
Yeah, so we can use these. We might not have deadfall and a ton of leaf litter, but we can use things like mulch to add that organic matter into our soil in our food forest.
It's about healthy relationships between plants, but instead of just one plant, it's multiple plants providing services to each other.
There we go. So what are our food forest or forest garden goals? And this is going to maybe differ a little bit, but just in general for food forests, we want to encourage biodiversity. We want to have food for humans. We want to have food for wildlife. We want to have that nice ecosystem mimicry. And then we want to have higher outputs than inputs. So we don't want to spend ages in our food forest every week, right?
Yes, reducing input is always a good goal. Another goal for all gardening is to reduce food miles, but it's even more so in a forest garden. Reducing food miles just means no transportation, no chemicals, no packaging, no marketing, usually organic. And it's really from yard to fork is what food forests are about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so inputs can be anything from your time to the water that you put in to the fertilizers. That's what we mean by inputs, and outputs would be produce, right?
Right, or mulch, or all the things that the plants produce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the difference between food forests and foodscaping. Can you tell us a little bit about this, Janice?
Sure. Foodscaping is another new concept. I actually only learned about it last year when I went to the Master Gardener Convention, and a lady named Bree Arthur has written a couple of books about it. But it's a good way to start because it just means putting edible plants among your ornamentals in your yard. And you can start with one plant, or you can do a whole area. It can be annuals or perennials. An edible forest usually involves a more complex design process and relationships between plants. In foodscaping, you don't worry about that so much. You just put your plants down, and they need to blend into whatever landscape design you have. Food forest, the design process involves more relationships than it does how it looks. It develops its own look as it grows.
Yeah, so foodscaping you could probably get away with in an HOA, but depending on your HOA, you might not get away with a food forest.
That's correct. But foodscaping can be pretty extensive. I mean,
yeah.
A lot of the plants that produce food are really quite attractive, but there is a food forest tends to survive from year to year. Foodscaping usually involves as much annuals as it does perennials, and so it requires replacement of plants and tending to them and maintaining them so they look nice.
Yeah, so we can sub in Like, for example, in Tallahassee, we grow a lot of ornamental kales and cabbages in the winter, and then a lot of ornamental sweet potatoes, especially in our, beautiful gardens. And so,
Yeah, I'd rather grow edible sweet potatoes than ornamental ones.
yeah. Yeah, and they can look really similar. It's just that you can actually eat the edible ones. They've been bred to taste a lot better. Those ornamental kales and cabbages taste pretty gross.
Yeah, they're pretty bitter.
Yeah. So this is your garden, Janice.
Yeah, this is what in front is my raised beds. I grow annuals, and those are 4x8 raised beds. And behind them is citrus trees, and on the porch are grapes. Behind the citrus are persimmons. There's an edible cactus there's an herb garden between the citrus and the annual garden. And there are fruit trees scattered throughout the rest of the property, but it's mostly concentrated in this area. I moved here 5 years ago, and it was just a lawn. There was nothing growing here other than grass.
That's awesome. Yeah, so it's nice to know that you can have a food forest, but then you can also have plots for annuals, which do tend to need, more, I would say, weeding, or you need to get in there and harvest more frequently.
And they usually need more sun. But tomatoes don't grow well under citrus trees, for instance. They got to have sun to produce.
Yeah.
And there's things to consider also when you're designing. I mean, I have a drain field off to the right of this picture, and it's still lawn because I can't plant things with big roots there. And I have a home, and there's a shed behind there, and a patio. So you design around what exists.
Mm-hmm. All right. So typically when we talk about food forests or forest gardens, there's these 7 layers. Today we're just going to simplify it a little bit, and we're just going to talk about canopy, shrub, and ground cover layers. And there's stuff in between too that we'll talk about. We just kind of put them into these 3 layers to make things a little bit more simple. And so basically the idea between these layers is that they all work together. They all service one another in different ways. So, all the way down to carrots and your other root vegetables, they can break up the soil, all the way up to your giant trees, which can offer lots of fruit and nuts, or other trees as well. Janice mentioned that we have, in this section, we have the pine trees. They're not technically right in the forest, but they provide a lot of that afternoon shade, which is really helpful
and pine needles. And
Mm-hmm.
it's actually, if you're going to create a food forest, it's actually important to have some of each layer, because they each provide a different service to the other plants.
Yep. So this is part of my food forest. And Tallahassee and in Florida, we get pretty voracious vines, I would say. So whereas other places, maybe you could grow a vining plant up a larger tree, I wouldn't want to do that necessarily on my property, because I wouldn't want to cut down on the production of the tree or on the production of the vine. So what I've done is I've made a nice cattle panel trellis. This is 4 cattle panels bent and rounded out to make this nice little walkway through here. And I have all sorts of grapes. I think I have 5 varieties of grapes, a kiwi, and 2 blackberries on here. But there's lots of stuff in here hidden along here that you wouldn't necessarily realize, because what we're growing is a polyculture, right? So it's not a monoculture. We're not growing a whole field of cucumbers or a whole field of sweet potatoes. We want to encourage lots of different plants at different points in the year. So for me, on my trellis, that's primarily for grapes. Before they really got going this year, and took over the whole trellis, I was able to plant some cucumbers along the trellis. And so the cucumbers grew up through it. And then, they benefited from the trellis and that they didn't rot on the ground. They were able to stay up there. And then they, were pollinated well because I have lots of other pollinator plants around this garden as well. So we have lots of variety in a smaller space to grow more things.
Yeah, and they provide, all different kinds of plants provide services to each other, such as producing nitrogen, attracting pollinators, capturing nutrients as they're chopped and dropped, and sustaining a larger variety of microorganisms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much life happening, not just above on the surface layer of the garden that we can see, but underneath the ground too.
That's right.
So usually, in a permaculture design course, this slide might be the entire, PowerPoint, but we're just going to, go over it briefly today. And then we're going to talk, more specifically about what we grow in our food forest here in Tallahassee. So first, you want to ask yourself, what do you want from it? Do you want to provide your family food? Do you want to provide wildlife food? What are your goals, essentially? Do you want to grow, a bunch of pecans? Whatever your goals are. So think about that first, and then you want to start observing. You want to be on your site, I would say, at least a couple months to a year to see really where the sun goes, how the different seasons affect it. So in Florida, we have a really intense rainy season. So you might see if there's any spot that has standing water, or you can see if there's erosion issues, and really just observe your site there. And then once you know some of the issues and the different effects that the weather and the sun play on your property, you can start to create a design and select plants that have similar growing requirements. So for example, I wouldn't plant a iris, which is a water-loving plant, next to a cactus, which doesn't like too much water, because I'm not going to be able to meet
those groups of plants that have similar requirements are called guilds. You'll see that name pop up sometimes, and it gets kind of confusing, but it just means plants that have a similar growing needs.
Yeah. And then to prepare the site, you want to, clear vegetation if it's there. So in my case, there was a bunch of grass. So I was able to turn the turf over and then mulch on top of that before I planted. You want to shape it to optimize water retention. On my property, I did not, shape it or put swales in because we have really heavy clay soil, and it, the water was just standing there. So I didn't want to make swales or ditches just to have standing water and to rot my roots. But for example, at the extension office, what did you guys do?
We're big proponents of cardboard and mulch. And actually if you're doing a food forest, it's a good idea to start, as Rachel said, as much as a year ahead of time. Select your site and then put down cardboard or dig sod or whatever you need to do and mulch and let it sit there for at least 6 months. This helps to improve the soil because the cardboard decomposes, the mulch decomposes, and it helps to loosen up the soil underneath. Mm-hmm. And earthworms move in and help with that too.
Yeah, and all sorts of fungi that are in there.
Yep.
So then you want to source your plants and begin planting. I would say, grow what you want to eat. And this is what I always say with kids. If nobody likes cabbage, then why are we growing a bunch of cabbage? But if nobody likes plums, don't grow plums, and grow, I would say, my recommendation is grow what grows well in your area. So I planted a couple of apples in my food forest because I was like, oh, they've got low chill hours. Maybe they'll work. They haven't worked, so I'm gonna have to take them out this year after a couple years of trial and go with something that's a lot more adapted to our climate. Maybe like a fig.
And that's another lesson. Don't get discouraged. There's nothing wrong with changing your mind or moving something or trying something different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these are our veg heads hard at work building our swales or ditches, whatever you want to call them.
Right. Yeah, this is at the extension office and we created our food forest. We had been growing perennial vegetables for a while, and that was so successful in this more shady area that we decided to go a little further. We'd been trying to grow annual plants there, and the tomatoes and peppers and squash just did not do well, even though there seems to be plenty of sun. In the wintertime, those southern pine trees kept it mostly in shade, and it really affected the production. So David Copps, who's a local natural garden designer, was kind enough to do a design for us, and we followed the contours of the land. It's easy to figure out what the contour on your property is by hand. We're not going to go into that today, but it is relatively easy. And it curved a little bit here. We dug these ditches, swales, and we ran water in them to make sure that the water flowed where we wanted it to. We wanted it to spread all the way from one end of the swale to the other, but then to stay there and sink into the soil instead of running off. Mm-hmm. So then we put the removed dirt up on the downside, and that provides a place for plants that need a more arid environment, such as herbs and cacti, things that don't need as much water.
Yeah, it almost creates a sort of terrace-like structure because it is on this.
That's correct. And we did have some erosion in that area. When it would rain, it would run all the way. There was a large path all the way down the center of the garden, and it would wash all the mulch on that path away and expose roots. So this completely eliminated that problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can tell, how diverse Tallahassee is. So I'm up in the northern-ish part of the county, and I have really hard packed clay soil versus down at the extension office. It's right at the Cody Scarp. So that's where this ancient shoreline is. So there's a lot more sand in the soil down there. And the water tends to go through it a lot faster than up in the clay areas.
And a lot of people do live south of that cutoff. It's essentially the bridge across by the park below the Capitol, and that everything below that is pretty sandy.
Yeah. So these are our hardworking veg heads.
It's a great group of people. Our forest garden is only 40 by 70 feet, so you can reproduce that on most urban lots. We have 50 species of plants growing, divided into 4 quadrants with pathways so we can access them and people can see them. We do grow bamboo also in a separate area, as well as sugarcane, because both of those are really big plants. This particular trellis was built to support our passion flower vines. The plot plan for our garden and the plant list can be found on our blog, which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, we'll share that in a follow-up email.
That's good.
So it's all about, working with what you have on site. So using these nice bamboo that we have on site that, isn't going to spread into the ecosystem, like Janice said.
So and on the 2 pictures on the left, our veg heads are planting the trees. This is really the backbone of your garden. And you don't want to plant a forest garden all at once. You want to start with your trees and let them get established. In each of our 4 quadrants, we have 2 or 3 main trees, and then everything else is shrubs and herbs and so forth. So we're planting the backbone of the garden there.
And then probably the biggest input, we use at my house, at Janice's house, and at the extension office is mulch, right? So mulch is sort of this magical, it seems like a cure-all, right? So it can help clay soil, it can amend clay soil, and it can also amend sandy soil. So that organic matter, as it breaks down, can help clay soil drain better, and organic matter added to sandy soil can help retain some of that water, where it kind of helps it meet in the middle there.
Yeah, and you can use leaves, clippings, cover crops dropped and allowed to decompose in place, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I've always been surprised at people who rake their yards and put the bags out and then buy mulch to put on under their trees and plants. We go around and gather up bags in the fall and put them on the garden.
Mm-hmm.
And we aren't going to get into pH today, but I will say that we had a pH problem in our garden. The pH in your garden needs to be at a certain level. Well, we had too high a pH. It was too alkaline because we were using a lot of mushroom compost, and that happens sometimes. It's pretty alkaline. So we had mulch in our pathways, and it started to decompose after a year or two. So we just dug up that beautiful mulch and put it on our growing area. And when we soil tested again, the pH had corrected. So mulch decomposed is a great addition to your property.
Mm-hmm. And it's free. Definitely
It's
utilize
free.
it in Leon County and surrounding counties too. You can go ahead and get it.
Yeah.
So first we'll start with our canopy or our tree layer. This is Janice's beautiful food forest. And you can see Janice has this kind of island throughout her yard. I really like that.
One of the reasons is I have a drain field out there in the grass, and I can't plant things in that drain field that have deep roots. So, and it's just, it's easier to walk. I don't have mulch pathways. I don't have all that labor to help keep them mulched, but I have grass, and so it just gets mowed with the rest of the yard.
Yeah. So fruit trees, one thing we're definitely gonna point out is that a lot of fruit trees get pretty big, or they can get big. So you want to buy them on dwarf rootstock if possible. And even then you want to keep them nice and trimmed up. So, I'm on a 1/3 of an acre lot, and I have a lot of trees pretty densely planted, but I keep them trimmed down so that they're not, touching each other essentially. So I can get more diversity and more varieties on my smaller lot. This is our extension agent Trevor showing us this January about how to prune. I think this is a nectarine or one of our peaches here.
Yeah, I keep my citrus pruned down to about head height.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my sons calls it my bonsais, but it really doesn't take a lot of pruning.
Yeah, so these are a couple of Janice's pictures, and you can see she keeps them pretty well maintained, and especially in a small space, or even if you're just an average height person, you don't really want to get up on a ladder and pick all your fruit, especially if it's something like figs where the squirrels are going to get the fruit before you do.
And with persimmons get a little larger. Actually, my persimmons are providing me shade on the west side of my patio now, but when they're filled with fruit, the branches hang down, and so you don't have to worry about keeping them pruned. So it's a matter of just observing your trees and figuring out what works for you.
Mm-hmm. So now we're going to go through some varieties of fruit trees that we recommend for this area. And so mulberry, this is my favorite fruit and fruit tree. I love it. There's a couple different varieties that you can get. You can get a black mulberry, or you can get the native red mulberry. And then, so they both are super delicious. And they're both very vigorous growing trees. I have ever-bearing dwarf red mulberry. And even so, it's dwarf. That just means it's going to get about 20 feet. So I still have to cut it back, pretty heavily every year to keep it at a manageable size so I can pick from it.
Yeah, I have 2 mulberries. I have the dwarf black mulberry, which so far has kept in a size that I can handle. But I have another mulberry that's a full size, and every year I have to do something similar to crepe myrtle on it. I cut it back to about head height because the leaves do fall off and it becomes dormant. Mm-hmm. And then when spring comes along, it grows back to about probably 15 or 20 feet in one season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can grow 6 feet in a couple months. It's nuts. But what I do is I take those trimmings and I make them into about 12 to 14 inch pieces, and then I just pop them in the ground, or I pop them in pots, and they will root so easily. I think I got like a 80 or 90% success rate on rooting this year.
That's great. Yeah, and we're talking a lot about pruning, but pruning a full-size mulberry tree, or the one that's grown one season, only takes about half an hour. It's not a big deal, and you only do it once a year.
Mm-hmm. And then the fruit is really nice because it's April to early May. It tastes kind of like a sort of a less tart blackberry to me, and less.
And the seeds are almost indistinguishable. That's my favorite grazing tree.
Mm-hmm. And the everbearing variety, so that just means that it's going to produce, the same harvest. It's just going to be over a longer period, so you're not going to be flooded with berries. I will say, don't plant this, over a tree or a driveway, because the berries can stain.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Citrus, of course, we know Florida is famous for its citrus. And we do get, some freezes here, supposedly in the winter. So there's some varieties that we can't necessarily grow, but these are some really good ones that we have in the orchard and then down in the food forest. So they're satsumas, Meyer lemons. You'll see a lot of Meyer lemons in town. The pumpkin tangerine. This is the sweetest tangerine I've ever had. It's so good. We have it at the extension office. Grapefruits tend to do really well, but they are pretty big. The kumquat, the Miwa variety. And then we have these hybrids. So, technically all citrus are hybrids. There's a couple of, species of wild citrus that have all been bred together over the millennia. But these ones in particular are really good, and they are, a mandarin hybrid or a Mineola. They're just delicious. This citrus page that we have at the office is really wonderful.
And citrus trees tend to bear heavily every other year, so don't get discouraged if you have a year when you feel like your citrus is off. Mine, well, my grapefruit bears, I have a flame, and that thing is still a small tree. I bet it's not 5 feet tall, and I have to cut off grapefruits because it weighs the branches down. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
But this year I have a lot more fruit on my trees than I did last year. It's a bearing year.
Mm-hmm. So, and then we also have our pollinators. So this little bird poop looking caterpillar is, what is it? A orange dog or a giant swallowtail. And that's a beautiful, huge swallowtail. And, mature trees, if they get a couple of these on them, it's not going to be that big of a deal. But also by keeping these caterpillars on here, not only are you increasing pollinator counts, but caterpillars are great sources of food for birds. So you'll attract birds to your food forest as well.
Another thing people worry about is leaf miners. And I tend to just ignore them. And actually over several years, I've had less and less leaf miners, because anything you put on the trees to kill the bugs that mine the leaves will also kill those that eat the leaf miners. And if you just leave your ecosystem alone, it sorts itself out for the most part.
Yeah, food forests are all about working with the ecosystem where it's at, and helping to encourage good bugs, right?
Yeah, and if you just have fruit trees, that might not work. You got to have the other plants that attract those predators in.
Mm-hmm. So the pawpaw, this is a favorite of mine, just because it's so cool looking, and it tastes pretty good. We haven't had huge harvests off of it yet at the extension office, but it is the largest fruit native to North America. It's in that custard apple family, like sapotes, and it kind of tastes like, it's like a texture of a mango, but it kind of tastes like a banana. It's a very bizarre kind of fruit, but it is native to North America. Further north, you'll see larger varieties, and the University of Kentucky has been doing a breeding program to get more cultivars out there to make this a profitable crop. But it is, the fruit bruises pretty easily. That's why it hasn't, you don't see it in the grocery store.
Sounds really good. I haven't had one.
And it does need a pollinator, so you got to plant 2. Loquat. This is a great ornamental tree. You'll see it in all sorts of neighborhoods. It is evergreen, which is beautiful. Lots of wildlife love this. Everything from squirrels to raccoons and birds. And early fruit in the year, after your citrus, is when you'll start to see the loquats. It provides lots of nice flowers in January, which is great for bees that are out there at that time. And it does have pretty big seeds in it. So the processing of it tastes really good, raw, but if you want to make, jams or jellies with it, you do kind of have to get through those seeds.
But it's such a pretty tree. It's an evergreen and it has such beautiful leaves.
Mm-hmm. And it has that high pectin, so you can make jams and jelly pretty easily with it. And you can make it, you can make like strawberry loquat jelly. You can use other fruit with it as well. Figs. So these are excellent human and wildlife food. We keep ours, pretty low. Trevor likes to keep the trees in the orchard pretty low so that we can always pick them. Especially figs are a favorite of birds. And you'll see, this is one where you'll see like a bird will come in and it'll just peck at it before it's ready, which is frustrating, but they're excited for the fruit too. And these bear in the summer. You'll see they can get pretty big. They adapt really well to Tallahassee. You'll see them in a lot of established yards and neighborhoods.
The Celeste is a little bit more compact, and so is the Blackjack.
Mm-hmm.
The figs come in all different colors. They range from kind of a yellowish green to dark purple,
Mm-hmm.
and all of those grow really well here. The one that is usually grown in this area is brown turkey, and that's the one we're used to seeing. That's my favorite.
Mm-hmm. That one can get pretty big, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're easy to prune. I just pruned mine back because I have the trees planted pretty close together, and it'll grow back quite quickly.
One thing I will say, if you have a latex allergy, you might want to avoid this because it is in that same latex family. It does produce latex.
Yeah, fig trees are practically immortal. They live a really, really long time. They grow about 12 to 15 feet tall and 8 to 10 feet wide, usually. But you can keep them as low as 6 to 8 feet with easy pruning. Again, more or less once a year.
Mm-hmm. And then at the extension office, we have a couple different LSU cultivars. So you can look out for those. I think we either have the purple or the gold. I can't remember exactly. Persimmons. These, persimmons. So there's Asian varieties, and then there's also native persimmons. So, and with persimmons, you have the astringent or the non-astringent. So astringent means that it's going to be really sour up until it's very, very ripe. And then it's almost really soft to eat. Whereas the non-astringents you can eat when they're not as ripe, and you can kind of eat them like an apple. They're a little bit harder. And
they're really good.
They're really good, yeah. So the non-astringent, the one we like the best at the office is the Ichikai K Hero variety, and it is delicious. And
it's
then,
also the most cold hardy of the different varieties.
Mm-hmm. Of the astringent ones, there's a couple of other recommendations, and then there's also the native persimmons. So if you especially want to attract wildlife, they're more adapted to the native varieties. So plant native.
And in fact, a lot of the Japanese varieties are grafted onto the native persimmons, so makes them more survivable here. Many times you'll see a fuyu recommended, and neither Trevor nor I have had much success with the fuyu. They tend to drop fruit. It isn't one that I would particularly recommend. But there's a lot of other varieties available.
Yeah, these are, persimmons are great. They're one that does pretty well in this area.
Yeah, the persimmons tend to, webworms tend to get on persimmon trees, but they don't hurt anything, and I just leave them alone.
Mm-hmm. So peaches and plums, these are, on Trevor's scale of, trees that require more maintenance. These are higher up the scale. They do require more pruning and upkeep. They can be more prone to pests, and, they may not produce as much as, say, a persimmon, but they are, I love plums. So I have quite a few plums and peaches in my food forest.
Yeah, I have plums. I really like the native plums, and you need a couple of plum trees, 2 or even 3, to make it produce fruit. There's really 3 types of native plums that are available: Chickasaw, Flatwoods, and Guthrie. The Chickasaw will make a thicket usually, unless you really keep it trimmed back. They're a little harder to maintain. Flatwoods has fewer root suckers, but the Guthrie is really the better of the 3. It's like a Chickasaw. It has sweeter fruit, but it doesn't sucker.
Yeah. I'm partial to this variety called Scarlet Beauty. It only requires 150 chill hours. So this is, a double-edged sword. It means that, our chill hours are hours between 32 and 45, right? So if we have not too cold of a winter, that means I'm probably going to get a pretty good crop off of this tree. But if we have a late freeze like we did this year, I only got 1 fruit off of my tree. And granted, it's still pretty young, but it's a gamble that you play. So here's some other ones to consider. And these are, recommendations from Trevor as well. We've got the pomegranate. They're beautiful. You can use these as ornamental or as, fruit-bearing trees. We got the pecan and the hickory, both native trees. Both can get very large, though. Chestnuts, a lot of the chestnuts you'll see nowadays are, American Chinese hybrids to deal with the blight that has gone through and devastated chestnuts. Olives,
or you can grow chinkapins, which are a native chestnut variety.
Nice. Bananas, you can kind of stretch our zone a little bit. Bananas need a little bit more time to produce. And so again, if you get a pretty cold freeze one year, you might not get fruit, but they're still really pretty, and they make a really nice tropical look to your garden. Some sort of wild ones that we included are sumac, and this one spreads rhizomatically, so through the roots, so it can make kind of a thicket. You'll see these a lot on the edges of woods, but they make these really cool kind of sour berries that you can make lemonade with. And lots of...
go ahead. There's other types of trees you might want to grow too that provide services but not necessarily fruit, such as redbud and cassia, which are legumes, and they harvest nitrogen from the air and insert it in the soil. Wax myrtles repel insects, and if you can rub wax myrtle leaves on your arms, and it'll help keep mosquitoes and things off. And they provide wax. Bayberry candles are made from wax myrtles, and they provide food for wildlife. So there's other things to grow besides fruit trees.
Definitely, yeah. So now we go down to our shrub layer. And you'll see, in my garden at least, some of my shrub layer is taller than my young trees. But here you can see, this is in my garden. I've got a really good mix. I've got salvias for the pollinators. I've got oregano back here. I've got cactus. I got sunshine mimosa, all sorts of different plants. So first, blueberries, they're native to North America. They do require a lower pH. So definitely get a soil test before you plant them. Because, if you have a higher pH, you can, treat the soil, but it's just going to want to revert back to what its natural pH is. So if you do have a lower pH, this is a great crop to plant. There's a couple different cultivars, or several different cultivars available. And you want to plant multiple for good pollination.
Yep. There's 2 different types really. The high bush, southern high bush blueberries bloom earlier. They're bloom in April usually, and they bear fruit earlier. The rabbit eyes are the more native variety, and they don't bloom till about June, and they produce through July. It's fun to have both, but you need to have at least 2 of each variety in order for them to pollinate, because they bloom at different times. And if you just have one rabbit eye and one high bush, the pollination is impossible because they don't have flowers at the same time.
And just like with that Scarlet Beauty, that early bearing high bush, it's a double-edged sword, right? So you can get an early crop that has maybe less pests on it, but you run that risk as if we get a late freeze, it can wipe out your crop.
That's true. And I have both types, and my rabbit eyes tend to be more healthy. They're healthier bushes. The high bushes are developed to grow in this area, but most of the high bush blueberries grow north of here, and these are called southern high bush, and they tend to be a little more picky. But I love blueberries, so I got to have those early ones.
Yeah, and this is one where to beat the birds, you got to go out there every morning and pick the ripe ones off, and you just kind of tickle them to see when they're ready. And if they fall off in your hand, they're ready. So here's some of our edible hibiscuses. You want to talk about these, Janice?
Yeah, these are kind of something new to our area. The cranberry hibiscus, the leaves are what's edible there. They do not have edible calyxes, and they're really a very ornamental plant. They die back in the winter, and they say that they will survive here till the next year from the roots. Some people I know in town have had that happen. We've not been successful with that at the veg head's office, so they're right on the cusp of being able to survive. But the Roselle, we've done a lot with. Peggy McDonald is our Roselle expert. She saves the seeds and starts the plants in the spring. It's good with those to not plant them until May or June, because if you plant them earlier, they'll start to bloom, and then the fall bloom, which is their main bloom, will not be as profuse. But those calyxes are delicious. They're actually a little more flowery tasting than cranberries. I actually like the Roselle sauce better than cranberry sauce. And red zinger tea is made from the dried calyxes. So many times you'll see that it's flowers. They'll say hibiscus flower tea. Well, it's not the flowers. Although the flowers are edible, the tea is usually made from the calyxes.
Yeah, and these big fruit-looking things are the calyxes here.
Yes. And you need to, if you want to save the seeds, you need to let them ripen on the plant until there's a pod inside that calyx, and it will actually open up, and that's when the seeds are harvestable.
Yeah, they're pretty big seeds too.
Yeah, they are. And the calyxes are, an inch or more across. They're really beautiful.
Yeah. I took a group of kids on a tour of our forest garden, and they were all amazed that you could eat most everything down there. And the cranberry hibiscus last year was their favorite because it's kind of like sour, and they try to see who could stand the most sour.
There's a native weed, I'll call it, that we used to call sour weed, and we would chew on that in the spring, and it actually tastes a lot like sour weed.
So this is Jerusalem artichoke. It's actually a sunflower in the sunflower family. It's native to North America, and you eat these tuberous roots. So I think this was planted from, 3 1-gallon pots the year before I harvested all these. And so they grow really tall. I've got a variety that gets, taller than my fruit trees. And they're beautiful, produce these wonderful flowers. But then the tubers are what you eat, and you can harvest those in the winter.
Yeah, they have sort of the texture of water chestnuts. They're kind of crispy, crunchy, and you can eat them raw or cook them. There's a smaller variety called dwarf sunray that we grow in the veg heads garden that only gets about 5 feet tall, but the roots are smaller also.
Yeah. They're pretty, they're good and healthy for you. They've got lots of fiber. So then we have some herbs or some pollinator herbs, our African blue basil and anise hyssop. These ones are just full of pollinators all summer long. They'll just, go from flower to flower. Especially you'll see these big fat bumblebees. And they'll land on this basil, and then they'll just walk between the flowers around there.
Yeah, there'll be multiple type varieties of bees on mine. And actually mine survived last year, and now they've come back full bore this spring. So in a mild winter, they will survive. Mm-hmm. And further south of here, African blue basil is a perennial.
Yeah. Yeah, it might die back to the roots. It just depends on how cold it gets.
And anise hyssop is a perennial. It survives from year to year here.
So if you bring in these pollinators and they come to, the plants that they want to eat from, they'll also go to your pollinator dependent plants like your cucurbits, your cucumbers, your pumpkins that need that pollination. So lemongrass, this one grows very well here. This is one I'll caution and don't plant it too close to your other plants because it gets huge. This is one that I had it in the shade for a couple years, and I was like, oh, they don't get that big. And then I moved to a full sun lot, and it is 6 to 7 feet tall and wide, and they're very hard to move. So I'm having to move things away from it.
Yeah, lemongrass is great for making tea and for seasoning. And if you're into growing tea plants, they're great for a food forest. Tea camellias grow wonderful here. All commercial tea green tea, black tea, all that tea is made from camellias, a particular camellia, Camellia sinensis.
And another benefit you can use for these, so we clip this back pretty heavy in the winter. And so we just use that as a living mulch. So we clip it and then we just drop it around and, bring those nutrients back into the soil.
Yeah, it's a good mulch because it doesn't decompose real fast. It works great.
So these are some fruiting plants that will need some support structure. So we've got grapes, of course, lots of good muscadine and muscadine varieties, or plants with muscadine heritage. These are my little razzmatazz, beautiful lots of little fruit, I'll say, and they don't have seeds. Blackberries, I love blackberries, but I hate thorns, so I grow a thornless variety. And then up here,
the thornless blackberries that grow best here are Uchita, Osage, and Natchez, and they're all pretty easily available.
Yeah, I think I have the Primark Freedom. I think that's out of the University of Arkansas. The passion flower or passion vine here. So this is already producing fruit. Passion vine is another good one for pollinators. So it's the larval host plant of a couple different butterflies here.
The kiwis, you need to have 2 kiwis for pollinating. They're male and female. And there's different kinds of kiwis. You can have the kind we see in the store that are green with fuzz, and then there's yellow ones that have smooth skin that's edible. They take quite a while to produce fruit, though.
Yeah, this is hard. The kiwi is one that I kind of debated putting on here because, I have a couple, the office has a couple, and I still don't know anybody who's gotten a really good harvest off of them yet, but,
Yeah, most of the grapes to grow here are muscadines, but there are a few bunching grapes, such as Blue Lake, which is it's an old variety, a Concord hybrid. Mm-hmm. Other things that grow that need vining, are Seminole squash, chayote, and climbing beans. So you can grow those along with your fruit, or like Rachel did with your cucumbers, you can plant them in different seasons and use the same trellis. Mm-hmm.
So now we're in ground covers. Again, we have this nice mix of species. I've got my flowering, I think this is my African blue basil. I've got some sweet potatoes. And then I have this sunshine mimosa over here. And the sunshine mimosa is so great. It's one of my favorite ones to show kids because it's also called the sensitive plant. And if you step on it, if you touch it, it just closes up its leaves.
Yeah, it's a great plant. I have it under my blueberries. It's actually a legume, so it produces nitrogen for your plants. the ground covers in the herbaceous layer are the most diverse of all the things.
Yeah.
They serve to exclude weeds, and they preserve the soil moisture and temperature and provide food and other services to the plants. They're strawberries, cowpeas, sweet potatoes, pollinator plants, and now these spinach substitutes.
Yeah, so of course we can't really grow spinach in the heat of the summer, but there are some substitutes. They're not, technically related to spinach, but we eat them like spinach. That's why they're called spinach. There's a couple different varieties. And they vary in texture. So I would say the Malabar is closest to raw spinach texture, I would say. That one needs a support to grow on. And then the Okinawa and the Longevity cook down pretty well, like spinach.
And they can be eaten raw in salads and all that. And they're really pretty. The one with the purple back. Yeah, it's really neat.
Mm-hmm. And we got herbs, some low growing herbs. We've got thyme, oregano, sweet marjoram. These ones all grow across the ground really nicely and form a nice ground cover.
Yeah, and other things that you can grow are gingers and turmeric. They're part of the herb layer too.
Mm-hmm. You can also grow chives. So this is a great one. So I grow a lot of chives, garlic and onion chives. And so, maybe I don't have an onion, but I can run out to my garden real quick and I can grab some chives and use those. And they flower quickly.
Multiplying onions will last from season to season. They work really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those walking onions, I love those.
Yeah.
So here's our sunshine mimosa. It looks straight out of Dr. Seuss. It's got that nice truffula flower. And this grows pretty low. It's maybe, 6 inches tall, but not, it's not a whole thicket of 6 inches. One I've had really good luck with is St. John's wort. I will say that I've had to I moved my thyme away from it because the thyme was not growing as fast as the St. John's wort was. And so it was starting to encroach on it.
Yeah, fennel and parsley are good to grow too because they feed caterpillars, both to feed the birds and to produce butterflies, which help pollinate.
Yeah, those are great.
Asparagus is another one that you can grow.
Mm-hmm. Asparagus is one that you want to have, you want to plant it and then it's like a fruit tree. You want to plant it and you want to leave it there because it's a perennial vegetable. So it'll keep coming back year after year. So here's some of our annual fruit and vegetables that you can mix in with the food forest. These, we were just kind of thinking summer ones in particular, but we got our sugar baby watermelon. And you can see they look like somebody just went bowling down here, down the hill. But these actually came back this year and they've produced fruit,
And you can't see that here, but they're planted right at the edge of the swale. Mm-hmm. So they're getting the advantage of the water that's because watermelon need quite a bit of water, of moisture.
And then here, this is in the 4-H garden over on the right. So, I knew the kids weren't going to be back probably this summer. So I went crazy and I was like, I'll just plant really big crops that will spread over the whole garden. We have Seminole pumpkin here. And then over in this bed, we have sweet potatoes. You can see the Seminole pumpkin is even growing over the sweet potatoes here.
Yeah, and they grow throughout the summer, so they help keep the weeds down in the summer. They are great summer cover crops. Mm-hmm. And this is where you can do some of your root crops too, carrots and the Japanese radishes. They'll help break up the soil and provide food for the other plants. Mm-hmm. Peppers and tomatoes can be grown, but they take more attention, and it's better to plant them in a different place.
Yeah, the sweet potatoes are great. I know a lot of school gardens around here, they'll, at the end of May, they'll plant their sweet potatoes with the kids. And then when they come back, they take about 4 months. So September or so, that's their first activity for the next school year is harvesting the sweet potatoes without much.
It's such a fun thing to do with kids. I plant sweet potatoes to eat, but also so my grandkids can dig sweet potatoes. Well, my great grandkids can dig sweet potatoes. It's a lot of fun.
It's like digging for gold, right?
It is. It literally.
So here we've got cover crops. We use a lot of cover crops at the Extension office. You want to talk about them, Janice?
Sure. Cover crops serve a lot of purposes. They keep the soil microbes functioning when other plants aren't growing, and they're some of the best to chop and drop for mulch, and then they create their own compost. They harvest the nutrients in the soil and then return it when they decompose in place after they're chopped down. They are wonderful. And things like this is buckwheat that's pictured here. They attract pollinators. Buckwheat from planting to blooming is only 30 days. So they're great to plant as a cover crop when you have a short range of time before you want to plant your next crop. Buckwheat is only about a foot tall, so it can grow all amongst everything else. It's really a wonderful. And then crimson clover is another one we use. On our blog also, there's a whole list of the various cover crops and when to plant them. And various cover crops serve as other purposes too. For instance, if there's a threat of nematodes, some of them discourage nematodes. Some of them harvest either nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium from the soil, and then when they decompose, they return it to the soil for the next crop. So they're really wonderful. Actually, old farmers used to leave their crops, their land fallow. That was part of their rotation, and modern research shows that is really not a particularly good practice. That always pays to have something growing in your soil to keep the microorganisms functioning, and cover crops are a great way to do that.
Yeah, we see, we get these cover crops and we plant them in rows or just these nice, really thick, they broadcast the seeds out, so they grow really thick and beautifully. So the buckwheat and the crimson clover especially, you see so many pollinators around all over them.
And other cover crops can be, in the summer particularly, cowpeas, and you cover the soil and keep it moist and keep the weeds from growing, and then you can get a harvest from it and then cut them down and let them decompose in place, and they serve the same as other cover crops.
Yeah. So here's last May at our extension office, here's Janice talking with some visitors here, talking about our swales. I think this is a swale here, and then we've got is that buckwheat there?
Yeah, that's buckwheat, yeah. That's probably a couple years ago, because that is a persimmon tree there, and it's quite a bit bigger than that now. Yeah, and there's some rye right where we're standing. There's rye on that side of the swale. That was some cover crops you can grow. Like I have a mix that's rye and Austrian winter peas and vetch, and so the rye is just standing up above the other cover crops, and it provides a variety of services to the soil and the other plants.
Yep. So you get a nice mix. It's not even with cover crops, you don't have to monoculture it, right?
Yeah, and you want to rotate your cover crops just like you do your other plants, and not plant the same thing in the same place all the time. Yep.
So then we have our pollinator plants. So, we love pollinators, and we want to encourage them to come to our gardens. And you can do a mix of native and non-native plants. Natives are great. They've evolved with the ecosystem and with the insects here. But there are some really good stellar pollinator plants that aren't necessarily native.
That's true. And we talk about pollinators, but we're also, with these plants, we're attracting predator bugs, and they're really important to your whole garden because they prey on other bugs, and they help to keep. Since we've been planting pollinator plants really extensively at the Veg Heads Garden, we've had so much less insect damage. It's just amazing.
Yeah. So you have things like echinacea here, this beautiful pink coneflower, purple coneflower. And we can see this is a polka dot wasp moth. So it's a moth that has evolved to look like a wasp for protection. And then we of course have milkweed, which does twofold. It is a larval host plant for the monarch, but then it also provides nectar as well for the adults.
That's beautiful. And another plant that's really good is sunflowers. It attracts various pollinators, but it also attracts things like stink bugs and keeps it away from your other plants.
Yeah. So here's a stellar one, pentas. They come in a couple different varieties. This is not native, but again, it's one of those that is just overwhelmed with pollinators. It's really good nectar source. Again, you'll see the flowers are kind of close together. So these fat bumblebees, they're so cute. They land on a flower and they walk to the next one. And you'll see a lot of variety there.
Zinnias are good too. The butterflies all love them.
Yeah, that's a great annual one to incorporate.
Yeah.
So here, this is my food forest, and you can see I just identified a couple of the different pollinator plants I have in this photo. I've got echinacea over here. This is in my blueberry section. This is a Mexican bush sage, so it's a salvia. It's got purple flowers that'll be coming out here in a couple weeks. I got Dune sunflower. This is great, but it spreads. And so for next year, I think I'm going to take it out and then put it in its own bed so it doesn't overtake plants like my blueberries. And then our African blue basil back here.
That looks really great, Rachel. I like that a lot.
And then, of course, we want to, if we're providing food and shelter and habitat for our wildlife, we want to provide them water as well. So you can do this really simply with just, this is, you know, during lockdown, I wasn't going to any stores or anything. So I looked through my garage and I found my Christmas tree stand. I turned it over. It looked like a good enough bird bath to me, and I added rocks to it. So what'll happen here is the birds might come over to the deeper section, but over here on this nice shallow end, you'll get lots of insect pollinators, and they'll land on the rocks, and then they can just gently puddle, and they don't have to worry about drowning. And in mine, I've, you know, we have that pond at the extension office, so I'm experimenting here. I put some duckweed and some Utricularia in here, and I'll see, you know, how it goes. I don't know. So you want to remember, you know, here's some tips and tricks. You want to remember to research the mature size of your plants. Here we've got our wonderful ag agent Molly standing next to our goldenrod, right? So goldenrod is beautiful. It's a wonderful sign of late summer, fall, but there's varieties that can be really big. So maybe it goes on the edges of your garden like it's growing here. So, you know, with Florida Friendly Landscaping, we always talk about right plant, right place. I was all excited from the plant sale last year, and I had this tiny little 4-inch plant, and I said, oh, I've got a little spotted bee balm. I'll just plop it in between these 2 fruit trees. And now the spotted bee balm is bigger than the fruit trees. So I got to figure out, it's just about to bloom, so I'm going to let it bloom and let the bees all get all over it. But
I had my bee balm in my herb garden, my herb patch, and I had to move it into a separate area. I put it around my my grain barrel because it tends to take over, and it reseeds every year. I mean, it is prolific, but the bees love it.
Yeah. Another name for it is dotted horse mint. So a couple things to remember, you know, your food forest is going to look really different from year to year and season to season. This is my food forest after 6 months. And looking at this now, I'm like, wow, I can't believe my food forest used to look like that, because it's so much more vibrant now. This is my little Dune sunflower. It was a little 1-gallon plant, and it's probably, I don't know, 10 square feet now. So this is it 2 years on. We planted in August of 2018. And we have so many ground covers, so many shrubs, so many trees. And it just shows how abundant and how well things can grow here. And you'll see, you know, I don't have much soil exposed, and what soil I do have exposed, it's covered with mulch, because I want to keep
really good
my microorganisms happy.
Yeah, food forest will take some maintenance, especially in the first year. You'll need to water and weed just like a regular garden, but as things begin to grow, like Rachel's garden, the weeds tend to be less of a problem. And you will still need to weed during droughts and so forth. You may need to prune and relocate and so forth, and replace annuals and grains and so forth.
Yeah, and we set up irrigation through here. There's no irrigation at the demo garden food forest, but I do have it at my house because it can get pretty dry. There's, last year we had 2 droughts, so I was, watering, but generally, I have a micro drip irrigation. I haven't run it since April, maybe May, because it is our wet season. So
yeah, I spent my first couple of years putting in micro irrigation all throughout my property, and now I hardly run it at all, except like in May, I think we had 5 weeks of no rain, and I did run it in various places, but it's not anything. I don't even have timers on it.
Yeah. I just turn it on for 20 minutes and then turn it off. And my thing now is I gotta go. One of my things that I wish I would have done, that you guys have done really well at the extension office, is I wish I would have put in better paths through my garden. I kind of let
it really does help.
Yeah, I let my ground covers grow, so I think I'll get a bunch more mulch and make some paths this winter.
Something else to do, right?
Yeah, there's always things to do, and move things around, cut them back. Like I said, my apple trees, I planted 3 apple trees. I'm getting rid of all of them this winter. They're not flowering, they're not producing. So I'm just going to get rid of them. I'm going to put in a persimmon instead.
Okay.
All right, here's Janice's.
Yeah, the top one, as I said, when I moved there, there was nothing there. Those 2 little beds that you see off to the left, that was it. And there were a lot of invasive around the edges. There were paper mulberries and mimosas and all kinds of stuff. I had cut down 21 paper mulberry trees around the edge of the property. It's unbelievable. So the first year was really spent getting ready. And then I moved my raised beds from the Fort Braden garden to here. They're off to the right there. And this side, there was nothing planted around the patio or anything. So I'm just getting started here. I've planted the fruit trees off to the right there. And I'm starting to make beds around the patio. And this is this year, after about, I think I planted the fruit trees 4.5 years ago, and then other things along and along. And so it's making progress. I still have things I want to do, but it's a process.
Yeah, that's like every garden. No garden is ever done, right?
All right. And I have shade. I mean, that backyard was, in the summertime, it was killing because it was just pure sun. And now off to the right of the umbrella there, actually this picture must be a little older, because now the persimmon trees shade that area in the late afternoon, and it works really well.
That's wonderful. All right, I think that's the end.
Yeah, and there are some, if you're interested in foodscaping or edible forest gardens, there's a couple of books. There's some not only online references, but there's a 2-volume set called The Edible Forest Garden. And Bree Arthur, who I mentioned earlier, wrote 2 books. One is called The Foodscape Revolution, and one is Gardening with Grains. And I have all those books, and I've learned from them. But you can learn with online sources and things like this too.
Yeah, definitely. We'll send a book list of recommendations and some links that you can learn some more at after this presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel and Janice. Claps all around. I think I saw Peter. Yep, there's Peter. Peter put some clappy hands up there. Great job. There were some comments down below about what a great presentation this was, how they enjoyed all your pictures. So we thank you very, very much for a great presentation. And you also brought out lots of questions. So I hope you got your thinking hats on, because you got some questions to answer. So folks, I will be going through the questions we took, and I'll try to keep up with any new ones that come up there. But then when we run through them, we'll kind of open it up. You can unmute yourself, video, stop yourself, and ask the questions almost if we were in real life. All right, so Um, let's see. Okay, so the Thai spinach, I guess celosia. We have that growing at the extension office. Is that something for eating in the food forest, or is that more of like an ornamental thing? What's going on with our Thai spinach?
I'm not familiar with that, actually. Maybe I know it by a different name.
It's I think she said a celosia. So I think of like the coxcomb type of.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. Um, Rachel, any ideas?
I've never heard of it.
We'll have to come back to that one. Let's see. There's more questions coming in. Next up. Oh, there was some questions. The cattle panels raised some interest. So the first one is, how do you bend those cattle panels, and then where do you get the cattle panels?
You get them at, I get them at Tractor Supply. They come in 4x8 or 4x16. The 4x16 is a nice size if you're going to do an archway.
Yeah.
They don't bend easily, and in fact, you don't want to bend them too acutely, and you want to bend them gradually because they'll come to a point rather than an arch.
Yeah.
I've secured mine with metal fence posts, one on each corner, with zip ties or wire to wire them to the fence posts, and they're really quite secure that way. I've also cut them in half. 16-foot one, or you can buy an 8-foot one. I buy a 16-foot one and cut it in half and cut one edge off so that it has little spikes sticking down, and I use it in like the middle of my 4x8 bed. It runs all the way from one end to the other, and I plant beans on each side of it. They're really very versatile.
Yeah.
Okay, question that just came up. How do you get a 16-foot cattle panel to your house, Janice?
Not easily. Actually, I do has a nice long trailer.
Yeah.
I have to schedule.
My boyfriend has, I think, a 4 or 6 foot bed on his truck. So, we looked a little crazy at Tractor Supply, but we, you put in one end and then you bend it up, and you bungee it like crazy. And it fits.
Yeah.
We got
4. My doctor was doing some work for me, and he brought a couple of them with his trailer. So you finagle.
Yeah, I've picked them up before, and I let the overhang go on the top of the truck,
right
on the roof over the cab, and I kind of get home
Exactly.
that way.
That's what I've heard too. Over the car.
Over the top. Yeah.
We made
Well,
drive slowly.
If you can carry a canoe down to the river, then you should be able to get a cattle panel on the top of the car.
Yeah,
I've seen them in boats, actually. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to haul.
All right, here's a great question. How do you protect your food forest from those critters like rabbits and deer? Is it possible? How do you do it, if so? Or maybe do you just let them have some?
I haven't had that problem, but I would just let them have it. I plant things like parsley and fennel and I let them have it. I don't mess with the bugs. And so if I have raccoons that eat my persimmons, and I just let them have it.
Yeah, I suggest getting a wildlife camera and then watching them eat it, because it's really fun.
It's a good way too to make sure you know what is eating it.
Yeah.
Well, and we plant to attract wildlife, and then we get all alarmed when we do.
Yeah, I will say that I know it came up later while we were going back and forth in the chat, but the sweet potatoes have been several master gardeners and myself have been dealing with rabbits eating the sweet potatoes. So finding out what is getting them can help you figure out a way to prevent it. So just a small little barrier of chicken wire has helped the rabbits stay out of the sweet potato patch.
Maybe you need to up the food chain and eat the rabbits.
Or you can do that. Yeah, rabbits are pretty tasty. I've been using my smoker a lot. I think they'd work. All right, let's see here. Any idea, you mentioned polycultures versus monocultures, and how, most of our food is grown in these big monocultures. And, what I think is cool about this food forest concept is, you're, kind of creating an ecosystem. So we've all been hearing a lot about how, our human development kind of hurts and harms wildlife and all sorts of critters and plants. And so our landscaping, we talk a lot about trying to kind of recreate these ecosystems and these processes in our landscapes. You guys are taking it to the food side of things as well. You know, do you guys know if there's anything where these polyculture systems can be as productive as monoculture systems, or, you know, you guys got anything to say on that topic, or maybe we'll have to look into it some more?
I've read some things about it, and in the tropics, they do make them productive. They use them as productive fields, so to speak. They interplant with, they may not be as diverse as an actual food forest, but they interplant trees with other crops, and there's other ways. And actually, some of the farmers in this area in the southeast are using plants that they plant around the edges of the fields to provide the services to attract pollinators and so forth. And they're using cover crops. They're doing it in a little bit different way than a food forest, but it is being utilized and in more frequency.
Yeah, one thing I'll say is, you know, this commercial agriculture relies on a lot of automation. So because you lack the, you know, straight lines and all the same, you know, you can't pick 1,000 carrots in a row in a food forest. But like Janice said, there's lots of different adaptations that farmers can make.
It's really interesting. I have a cousin who lives out east of Madison, which is only about 60 miles from here. And we went riding very close to where he lives, and there are huge fields there. I'd say 300 or 400 acres of what we saw were carrots. I didn't realize that this area was planting that much crops like that. And so I got out and I picked a carrot, and they're planted so close together that they're actually shoulder to shoulder. It was a very interesting experience, and it's so foreign to what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know more and more, you know, small farmers, sustainable farmers trying to figure out ways to mix these different crops together for the diversity and for a lot of the reasons you guys mentioned. So, all righty, let's see. Do we know which pollinator plants attract the wasps that prey on the insects that eat our fruits and veggies in the garden? So which plants? And there was a kind of a similar one down below, like well, we'll get to that one later, but
I think pretty much all of them. I don't know which ones specifically attract wasps. The big thing is to plant a real variety of pollinator plants, and then you hit all the spots.
Yeah, you get predatory, and then you get like what did we find? Those mummified aphids on the kale with the kids last year, Mark.
yeah.
With
I
like
think
tiny wasps.
I think the diversity is really important. And then I know Janice mentioned it, you know, considering when you're using pesticides,
Mm-hmm.
you know, remembering that if you're treating, you know, some of these pests with pesticides, a lot of the times you're also harming a lot of the predators that are also controlling them. So there's lots of research in agriculture where, you know, that is what happens. Once you start treating for one thing, a lot of the predators go away, and you then have more of a pest problem. So Becky just mentioned she gets a ton of wasps on those spotted bee bombs. And then I know in the Veg Heads garden, you also had you had some like habitat for wasps, right? So I think there was some old.
That's another important thing. Yeah, and
4-inch pipe cap.
Yeah. If the wasps that hang on your house are not bothering you, just leave them. They are also preying on the bad insects in your garden.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you talk more about swales?
Sure.
Yeah.
What define a swale for us?
A swale is a shallow ditch, essentially. It's just a term like so many things. You know, we talk about things with different language, and swales are just a shallow ditch. Ideally, it follows the contour of the land, and it's meant to capture water, to prevent erosion, and mainly to conserve the water in the soil so that it's available for the plants.
Yeah, basically it's like a rain garden, right? So you dig a swale, and then you have a berm. So the berm stops it from going further downhill, and the swale where it slowly recharges into the soil.
Yeah, and typically what you would do is you would dig your, again, you got to make sure you're on the contour because you don't want to create a flowing water
Mhm.
ditch, right? You want it to kind of hold it and kind of, water finds the level. So
Yeah.
typically what you do is when you find that level, you dig your swale and you put the soil up to create the berm, and bingo, well, it sounds a lot easier than it really is, but bingo, you have a swale and then a berm right
That
there.
really is not all different. And finding your contour, there's stuff online that's available, but essentially all you need is a couple of sticks like bamboo or whatever, and a horizontal stick between the two of them. You make well, started out with the tripod. I think we just used two, but they are together at the top with a horizontal stick, and you put a level on that, and you move one leg. You put one leg there, and then you move the other leg until the level is level, and that's where your next marker goes. And then you rotate it, and you put it until you find the level again, and it follows the contour. It's very easy to do. It's really cool, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. Yeah.
And it's very it's an optical illusion. It goes in places you never thought it would.
All right. There was a comment about, and maybe less of a question, just more of a comment, but being careful with cardboard next to your house, thinking of termites. So, there is an issue with mulch and, any kind of cellulose type product. You do want to keep at least a foot, maybe even more, maybe 2 feet of just plain dirt, soil. Sorry, I think Molly's on here. Plain soil, between your mulched area and your foundation of your home, to try to help with reducing termite activity. So be careful with mulch and cardboard, right up next to the house. The other
Well, and
important
termites build little tunnels up. I mean, usually the foundation of your house is masonry, and they build little tunnels. If you have wood, then you'd really have a concern, but it isn't. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a good way to prevent them, and the main thing is with water too.
They need moisture.
Another real thing to kind of draw termites close to your house is having water right there next to the, even if it's on a slab, you can have some troubles. Maybe we'll have to bring a termite expert in. I actually saw one of our UF termite expert, Faith Oy. She's an amazing presenter, so maybe we'll have to bring her in and talk termites one day.
Yeah.
Sounds
Termites
good.
are fascinating to me. Okay, well, this is a really good question. I like this one. Do you mulch around your fruit trees, and how close to the trunk should the mulch go?
Yeah. So you
Go
want
ahead.
to go?
No, I was going to let you.
So mulch, you want to, the roots of a tree, they breathe, right? They need oxygen and they need to breathe. So you want to, you don't want to mulch, say about 12 inches out, or if you do it very lightly, but you definitely don't want that mulch up against the bark of the main stem of the tree. And especially if you have, you want to be able to maintain and see that graft line on a lot of fruit trees. So if you have your mulch go up too high, it's going to start producing roots, and then you're not going to be able to see where you have your sprouts coming out. Are they your rootstock or are they your main tree? Which ones do you trim?
Yeah, actually, ideally, the top roots of the tree should be exposed a little bit. They're called flare roots, and that's actually, not planting your trees too deep is really important, and the same with mulch. You want those roots to be exposed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I will say in Florida, UF does not actually recommend mulching around citrus trees. That is something that's a little bit different, and in other states, they will recommend mulching around all trees, but citrus are known to get some particular fungal disease problems. So if you come to our office, our citrus trees are mulched, and that's more to prevent from lawnmowers and weed eaters taking the bark of the tree off. So they're more protective. But that is the one tree that you may not want to mulch around, but yeah. Anyway, that one goes back and forth. I've seen different things on that, but the official UF thing is don't mulch citrus trees. What species of bamboo grows well here in Tallahassee, especially that clumping one you were talking about, Janice?
Well, actually, this is an area of the greatest biodiversity in all of the United States, and we can grow pretty much any kind of bamboo here. The running bamboos typically grow in cooler areas, and the clumping bamboos grow in tropical areas. There are some bamboo farms within driving distance. The bamboo we have at the extension office, we got up at Doe Run, Georgia, which is near Moultrie. When Rachel sends out the email, I'll have her put the 2 species that we grow, but there are many, many, many species, and they all have different characteristics, different sizes, and so forth. The big thing is to, unless you want to do a lot of maintenance, is to make sure it's a clumping bamboo. If you already have bamboo and you're really not sure about it, running bamboo usually puts out new shoots in the spring, and clumping bamboo does it in the summer and fall.
Good to know.
Yeah, and if you have a bamboo shoot coming up, 10, 15 feet away, good chance you got to run.
It's running, yeah.
And you're actually, the reason we have bamboo running wild in certain places is people used to plan to make fishing poles.
Mm-hmm.
And then the people that planted them might sell the property or die, and then it was not maintained. They're pretty easily maintained. You can just kick over the new shoots rather easily, and they do not sprout back. And bamboo clumps even need to be maintained. You want to cut out those that grow too close together. There needs to be air growing between them, and those are the ideal. They're a bamboo trunk, so to speak, is called a culm. Those culms are the ones that are good to use for structures and so forth.
All right, there was a question about Rachel. You mentioned the mulch from the landfill.
Yeah.
Any assurances, and I can help you out with this one if you need, but any reassurance that the mulch is healthy and not bringing in invasive plants, metals, anything bad for the gardens?
Yeah, so you can't beat the price. It's free. But I've gotten it for a number of years, and there are some little plastic pieces occasionally that you'll find in it. Generally, I haven't had any invasive issues either at the office or at my home garden, because that mulch, it's shredded and then it sits there and it composts and it gets really hot. Like sometimes you'll even see it steaming in the summer when you go pick it up. So that should kill most weeds, whether it's seeds or invasive vegetation that can spread vegetatively.
And the same possibility of a problem with leaves that you gather from bags along the road too. The Tradescantia can be in there.
Yeah, I think that's been
different
my
kinds
word.
of weed seeds. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had more trouble with collecting those leaves on the side of the road, bringing in weird things rather than the mulch. And I will say that they have done testing on it in the past. I don't know when the last time, I know it was just a couple of years ago, they tested it for metals and things like that, and it was below all of the required safety limits.
If you get mulch from tree cutters, it's a little better, because if you're cutting in yards, then the trees are pretty much free of problems. People haven't been spraying. If they're cutting alongside of the road, then you have the possibility that they've been sprayed with chemicals and so forth.
And just one other mention or comment for mulch is, if you do get freshly chipped mulch, let that sit for several months before you start using it in your garden, because otherwise there can be some. And
definitely don't dig it in, because it uses nitrogen as it decomposes, and it'll deplete your plants with nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
Any let's see, any recommendations for fertilizing citrus naturally?
There's a bunch of organic fertilizers that you can use. The thing with, using these sort of homemade fertilizers, that you don't know the content necessarily. You don't know the NPK values, right? So you don't have as much control as if you use something that is, produced and, sold commercially.
I use the fruit tones. And it's important to get the right kind of even organic fertilizers, because citrus trees are usually grafted onto rootstock that requires a lower pH. And so instead of using citrus tone, you use blueberry or holly tone is what it's called, because it creates a lower pH. In citrus, it's recommended to fertilize them in February, April, and July. You don't want to fertilize them after July because they'll produce new growth, and then it'll be more subject to freezing and frost and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Whoa, where to go? Let's see. This one about the grape, I might come to this grapefruit question. I might come back to this one. I believe this was Roberta Mann, Master Gardener Volunteer. She's got a grapefruit that's not bearing after several years. I'll reach out to you, Roberta, and I'll chat with Trevor. I had some other questions I'd want to ask you about that one. Could you, you all mentioned the mulberries. Could you please clarify which mulberry is desirable and not desirable? So there's the white, the black, the red.
There's I'm
I know you've looked into
on
this.
mulberries. The one you don't want is paper mulberry, and that's the one you're going to see out in the woods and coming up in your yard. There's male and females of those. Some of the females bear fruit, but the males don't. They have kind of furry leaves. They're not shiny. The native mulberry, in my opinion, would be the best. That's the red mulberry. They have good fruit. They have shiny leaves. The one I have, I got from Just Fruits, and it's called white mulberry, but it has shiny leaves also and very good fruit. An actual white mulberry is supposed to be another invasive, so I'm a little ambivalent about that. Black mulberry theoretically has the best tasting fruit. I haven't found that to be the case for my dwarf mulberry. They can actually be grown in pots. They're not only a dwarf tree, but the fruit are a lot smaller. My white mulberry has fruit that's 1.5 inches long. I mean, it's really nice and big. The dwarf mulberry is maybe 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch long, and it doesn't bear as profusely as the other mulberry. So there's red mulberry, white mulberry, black mulberry, and paper mulberry.
And the white is a non-native that spreads pretty well. I don't know if it's on the official invasive list.
Right.
Paper mulberry definitely is on the invasive list.
White mulberry is the one that was brought in for silkworms, and that industry never took off, and so then they've spread. And paper mulberry is used in the tropics to actually make paper, but here it's just a weed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there was a similar question. Let's see, it had to do with invasive plants. And I wanted to remind folks that invasive plants, you know, the main concern when we call something an invasive plant is that plant's ability to invade natural forests, natural ecosystems. There's a lot of non-native plants that kind of run amok in disturbed settings like, you know, cities and around developments. But the main concern, and when they get to the bad list, you know, the invasive list, that's because they're a potential problem in ecosystems, native ecosystems. And so the question I think had to do with sunshine mimosa. You guys showing that as a ground cover. It can become aggressive, sunshine mimosa, but that one is a native. So we don't consider that invasive. And I thought there was...
and it, you know, it's technically related to the mimosa tree. I forget the exact scientific name of that one, but it starts with an A.
That's Albizia, not a true mimosa.
Yeah, I have my sunshine mimosa sort of contained in a bed, and there's some bricks around it, but you can let it grow out through your grass and mow it with the grass. It survives just fine, and it works.
And it dies back in the winter. So
here this is actually the question I was looking for. It's the next one. So when you all mentioned loquats, why isn't loquat considered invasive? And I think I'll let you guys handle that one. Why isn't loquat considered invasive?
I don't know.
Okay. Rachel, you got anything?
Yeah, because it's not, it hasn't, you know, escaped into the ecosystem as far as I know. You know, these invasive plant lists are always being updated. They're always being studied. Florida is, you know, because it's so good to grow so many temperate and tropical, subtropical plants here, that means that we have a lot of invasive plants potential. Loquats, you know, it remains to be seen. Figs are technically on that list, but, you know, they can be invasive, say in California. because they have a particular wasp that makes them able to spread, but we don't have that wasp here, so the risk is much lower.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
know
would
that's
agree
true,
with.
that some things that are invasive in one area of the country are not invasive in others. And
Mhm.
that's true as far as north and south too. Things that are invasive in South Florida are not yet invasive here.
Yeah, and we
Mhm.
have one of our invasive plant gurus with the Master Gardener Group, Lana Arnold. She's posting, Morris alba. So that's the white mulberry.
Mhm.
That's the one that the mulberry you commonly see around Tallahassee, kind of growing on roadsides and vacant lots and some people's yards. Yeah, we have one actually here at the extension office.
Huge.
That one is not native, but it's not on the invasive list yet. Loquat is on the caution list for Central and South Florida. So for North Florida, they haven't deemed that to be invasive. And again, remember, that means going into natural ecosystems and kind of disrupting those processes and disrupting the ecosystem. So, but these lists are always changing as we get more information, because we're scientists and we believe in science. So the more data we collect, the more our opinions and our ideas are shaped. So question, what time of year do you prune a fig?
You want to take
I
that?
pruned mine last week. uh, I don't know what the recommendations are, but a fig is a very healthy, hardy plant, and it'll survive most anything.
Yeah, I think the official recommendation from extension folks would be soon after fruiting. I
Well,
used to
now
prune
it was good then, because my figs are just all
Yeah,
gone.
I used to prune mine. A lot of times you think of the dormant season pruning, and I remember I would always prune mine in the middle of winter. But then I remember when soon after I started the job here, figs recommended the prune soon after fruiting.
If you're pruning something like a mulberry that really grows fast and your idea is to keep it small, then you want to prune it when it's dormant, because it'll just sprout back if you don't. So it depends on the tree, and figs don't grow that fast. They're fine. And it helps to shape the tree if you prune it now, and then you can kind of keep an eye on it throughout the rest of the summer and fall so it grows where you want it to.
Another good thing is I don't know about you all, but I'm dealing with fig rust on my fig. And so by pruning it now, I can start going in there and getting all those leaves that have fallen to kind of keep that rust from coming back next year. That'll be
Yeah,
one
it
of my,
starts losing leaves as soon as it finishes bearing. It thinks it's fall.
yeah. There is a green fig variety in the food forest here at the extension office. How do you guys
Hollier,
feel with that
the
compared?
Hollier, yeah.
Is it pretty good?
I haven't tasted any fruit from it yet. I don't even know if I didn't notice. We weren't there this whole summer, so I don't know if it had figs this year.
It's got a couple.
I got some just recently, Janice.
Big-
Very, very sweet. It's a green fig, and it doesn't turn dark brown. And it was sweet, and the birds hadn't gotten to it, so I ate 2 of them.
Yeah,
Good.
the big one there, the reason we tried to grow that one, right, is to trick the birds, right, so that they don't know it's ripe, but it is.
And that's true. The birds leave the green ones alone more than they do the purple ones.
All right, I think this question came up when you're talking persimmons. Can the native hybridize with the non-native?
I don't know.
Yeah, I'd have to do some research on that to find out.
Yeah, they're different species, so I would doubt it. They are grafted. The Asian persimmons are grafted onto the native rootstock. You can graft things together that are in just kind of even just a general family, but as far as naturally, producing viable seed that are some sort of mix, usually that does not happen between.
Well, I haven't seen anything about persimmons naturalizing, and you'd have to plant the seed to determine that if that happens. So.
Yeah. A question about y'all didn't mention pears, but are there some pears that you all like to grow here?
Yeah, they're
pears you usually see in old homesteads and so forth they're called sand pears. They're actually a Kuiper pear, and they grow well here. I don't know about other varieties. Rachel may.
Yeah, there's quite a few. I just don't happen to have any here, and we do have a really huge one at the extension office. That's a sand pear, and then I'm trying to remember what we have another couple. They tend to want to grow up, so Trevor's always tying bricks to them to try to get them to grow instead of going up, to grow kind of like this
They're really bad about doing vertical water shoots, and then they get all thick in the middle of them because there's shoots up off every branch.
Yeah, but for folks that don't know, we keep mentioning Trevor's name. We're talking about Trevor Hilton. He's another extension agent over here at the office, who's our fruit and nut tree expert. I call him our granola agent. I think when I think of him and talking about pears, we're not likely to be able to grow the pears you think of at the store, the Bartlett pears, because again, it has to do with chilling hours. It doesn't get quite cold enough. Janice, a question about the variety name of the Jerusalem artichoke down in the Veg Heads garden.
Dwarf sunray.
Okay, thank you. And Rachel, how did you cook those artichokes, those Jerusalem artichokes?
I gotta say, I was too scared to cook them this year.
I was gonna say that's a big bucket of Jerusalem artichoke.
Well, I harvested them thinking I'd move them because they were so tall. I didn't expect them to get 12 feet tall. And then I brought some to the office. I shared some with the master gardeners, and then I just replanted them. And I was like, well, I don't really have any other place for them, so I'll just stick them right back. This year I'm going to try to roast them.
I've had them in stir fry. They're good in stir fry.
Good in stir fry. Okay.
Roasted, you can roast them. You can eat them raw. They're great in salads. They got a nice crunch. Roasting is the easiest, and the skins on them are actually edible. They're real. The skin is real thin because they're all contorted. They're hard to peel.
Yeah.
All right, could you all please repeat your favorite blackberries varieties, the best types of blackberries for the area?
Yeah, you've got a couple, Janice.
Ouachita, Ouchita, Natchez, and I forgot the third one.
I believe maybe on the next question, while you guys start talking about the next question, I will, I think we have a really good EDIS document on blackberry varieties for North Florida.
Yeah, you'll find all this stuff if you just Google.
Yeah, I'll try to put that in the comment.
I've had really good luck with the Primark, the ones from Arkansas. There's the Freedom, and then there's another variety as well. They're both thornless. And what's really nice about this Primark ones is, blackberries tend to fruit. They have first year canes and second year canes. But these ones fruit on both. So you can get a really early crop on last year's canes, and then you can get a later crop on this year's canes.
That's really nice. And these are the ones that I mentioned, and probably Rachel's too, are all thornless, which is really good.
Yeah, I just put a link in the chat box. That's a EDIS document that goes over the various blackberry varieties for Florida. And I would do, the native blackberries are quite good. There's a dewberry and the blackberries. So the dewberries are the kind of the earlier ones that grow on the ground. Then you have your blackberries later on that are, taller bushes. But they do have thorns. So, get ready. Actually, you can't see, but my hands are all cut up from weeding the gardens here and getting lots of dewberries.
And the wild blackberries always seem to be a place where people caution about rattlesnakes. I'm always worried about them.
Yeah, I go foraging for dewberries in the spring, usually early May or so, and I love them. They taste so good, but they're so sharp that I don't really I weed them out of my garden too. I don't.
Question of where can you get the sunshine mimosa?
You can find that at a couple local nurseries. I've seen it. Yeah. I've also seen it called powder puff mimosa. Yeah.
There's actually two kinds. You see it out in the wild. It's called, I forget. Anyway, there's a kind that grows in the woods that has stickers. The sunshine does not. Yeah. And the one that has stickers does not. It's not as thick and it won't cover the ground. It's just a little vine.
Yeah, there's powder puff mimosa, and then there's the sensitive briar mimosa. So there's two very closely related, but both native. So that's great.
The other blackberry that I couldn't remember is Osage.
Osage, okay. Someone just put a comment that I think they have seen it at native nurseries. So yeah, I think many of our local garden centers are beginning to carry that.
Or get a cutting from anybody that has it. It roots easily, and you got plenty of it. Everybody can share.
you know, if you're safe enough, there's plenty of right of ways that have it where, you know, they're just mowing it out, edging it off of the side. So
Yeah, you'll see it growing in medians, actually on Thomasville Road, right around I-10, and down south of town on the Capitol Circle. It alternates with perennial peanut. It really is. It's a great. Let's see, they have it contained within the median, so it's a good place to
the
grow.
perennial peanut and the sunshine mimosa work well in medians because there's pavement all around it, so it's
Right.
likely to spread. So there's a comment here about it grows into the grass. Same with perennial peanut.
Right.
Sunshine mimosa can also do that. So be willing to either pull it or kind of let it go loose a little bit. Edible ginger. You guys mentioned gingers, and I get this question a lot, so I wanted to, you know, have you guys touch on it. Are these the same as our ornamental gingers? Is there any difference? Can you eat ornamental gingers? What's going on?
Yeah. Go ahead, Rachel.
Well, so it's like with most vegetables, I would not eat an ornamental in general, because one, you don't know what it's been, especially from, you know, nurseries and being grown, you don't know what it's been sprayed with. Being an ornamental, it hasn't been, you know, treated as an edible plant. Two, it hasn't been bred to be as good as, you know, the official, you know, Zingiber officinalis, whatever the edible ginger is. There's a couple different ones that we can grow here, including turmeric, actually, which is a ginger relative. It does really well in some shade.
Yeah, but like your pine cone gingers and your butterfly gingers, you know, those are not edible ginger. Don't eat those.
No.
Yeah, well, I have experience with that. I had a ginger that somebody gave me that was already in a pot, and they said it was the culinary kind.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew it and I dug it up, and it looked a little different, and I tasted it, and it was not good. So
Be
and
careful.
it's really important to know what you're growing to eat. For instance, there's an edible Rudbeckia that's called Cherokee Greens or Sochan, but other Rudbeckia is not edible. In fact, it can be hard on your stomach. I don't know that it's actually poisonous, but it's really important to know where you're getting it from and that it is actually edible.
Yeah, one thing I'll mention with the food forest is, so when I made part of making the plan and like kind of updating your plan as you plant, really helps, because your food forest can change a lot from season to season and from year to year. So you can look back and think and see, you know, okay, this plant died, or this plant has spread a lot, or you know, this plant did really well. So labeling your plants, you know, in situ, putting little labels on them is a great idea, but then also labeling a nice map is great too.
Quick question here. We got about 10 minutes. I think we're going to make it through all these. Malabar spinach. They're getting more flower than foliage. Can you eat those flowers?
I don't know.
I don't know.
All right.
I know it grows berries that the birds eat.
There was a comment on St. John's wort. I appreciated this comment. So that is a medicinal herb. So the comment was just that please check with your physician before using any medicinal herbs. You know, to be careful with some of the herbs, especially.
I grow it just as a ground cover. I don't eat it or anything.
I have it's not a food forest, just a wild area in my yard that I let kind of go nutso. It started with there was violets that were coming up, so I just kept letting it go. And now there's a lot of the native St. John's worts are just coming up by themselves in that area as well. It's pretty neat. Cool plant.
I let grass grow in an area of my yard back in the back because fireflies like to live in the grass.
Yeah. Let's see. Can we find buckwheat seed locally?
Native nurseries may have it. I usually order mine online. But
yeah, we used to have a great source with Gramlings. You know, they were a great local place that provided a lot of these types of cover crop seeds. They went out of business a couple of years ago. I did see, I think some of the other nurseries are starting to try to provide some of these to kind of make up for the loss of Gramlings. And I think Native Nurseries was the one I know we've seen recently advertising that, you know, they have a cover crop seed, but just check your local nurseries. It's always a good, you know, if you have a favorite, let them know that you're looking for a particular seed and they might be able to source it for you.
I was going to say, be sure and ask for it, because the more people that ask for it, the more likely they are to stock it.
Yeah.
I think maybe one of those feed and seed stores like Joaquina, maybe.
Joaquina
You
would
know, out
probably
on
work as
Highway
well.
20, there's one, yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be a great source. So yeah, just call around.
Yeah.
The the mixed cover crops are available online, and usually they tell you a lot about them, about what they furnish and when they should be planted and that type of thing. There's a lot of stuff available.
All right. Well, we have a list maker in the group, and they want your top 10 pollinator plants for the food forest. Wait, there's a catch though. That does not become a nuisance the following year. Okay, so we'll take maybe 5 from each of you. You can think about it. I'll count them down.
I'll say anise hyssop. You want to go?
An African blue basil,
Oh, dang it. That was my
and
next.
most any kind of sage,
Rudbeckia.
Got it.
or coreopsis.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna say
Ironweed.
Galardia, but that one spreads pretty easily.
It gets pretty big, but it's great.
Any
Which one's that,
salvia.
Janice? Salvias. Janice,
Yeah.
what did you say?
I said sage, yeah.
Salvia and sage. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That still counts as 1. Sorry, you got 5 more to go.
I'm not gonna make it.
Pentas.
Pentas. Yeah, you got to help. You got help from the crowd. Pentas. I mean,
Yeah, chime in, everybody.
He's asking
Zinnias.
for. They're not asking for
Zinnias,
perennial
yeah.
plants. So
Zinnias.
zinnias would be a good one. Let's see. You got our pentas in there. How about your well,
Sunflowers.
become a nuisance? I was going to say that beach dune sunflower.
Yeah,
I know the pollinators are
just
all over
regular
that.
sunflowers, annual sunflowers.
Annual sunflowers. There's another one that could be used as a trap crop as well.
Um,
And then horse mint, but Becky says be careful. So I don't know if that's going to fit the
And bee balm, it tends to be big, but it doesn't spread badly.
Monarda. So bee balm. Joe
By
Pot.
Monarda.
We're getting some help here. Fire spike, fire bush.
Oh, firebush is great. That's one of my favorite plants.
the firebush is pretty cool. I got some, I think it's called like fireflies or firelights or something like that. And the leaves are tiny and the whole plant is really small.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah.
It's a great dwarf variety.
All right, I think you all did pretty good on that. Good job. Thanks for the help, crowd.
With a little help, right?
Yeah. Are citrus self-pollinating?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. There's a thing with the honey, the bees being put on in citrus groves, but it's not. Right. They are self-pollinating. They do put bees out on citrus fields, but it's mostly, I think, to kind of keep the bees going before they get moved somewhere else, type of thing.
And the one thing about citrus, we always get these worried calls. All my fruit for my citrus is falling. What's wrong with my tree? And citrus is just really well known for, it can abort like 90% of its small fruit in a season. It's just,
it only grows what it can support.
Yeah.
Whereas the pears, like a sand pear tree, will actually break branches. It doesn't abort its fruit.
Yeah, and like plums and peaches, if you get them growing too close together, you have to go through. A lot of times you'll have really good pollination, and especially if it's a young tree, you want it to grow that root system first rather than supporting fruit and putting all that energy into fruit or too many fruit. So you have to pick a lot of the fruit off, which can be hard.
Maybe the last question has to do with the food forest here at the extension office and the design of it. So how much of a problem was the shade from the pine trees in that food forest design, and were there any design choices to deal with it?
Well, the problem pre-existed the food forest, and it was one of the reasons for growing it there, because we were trying to grow annual vegetables. David Copps designed the food forest, and we've added things since then, and we have not made any accommodation for the shade. In other words, we've selected whatever plants we wanted, and we've had no problems with it. In fact, possibly some of the trees and so forth are growing a little slower than they might in a fully sunny area, but that's not a negative. Actually, that's fine. We haven't had any problem with it.
Yeah.
And it's not a pervasive shade. There's sun in the morning, from the east and there's sun in the afternoon from the west, and the trees are pretty much due south. When it's really shaded the most is in the wintertime, and most of the trees are dormant anyway. So it depends on where your shade's coming from and how often you get it.
And that was a big part of moving those, the deal with the vegetables is our, the fall, the cool season crops are kind of like our favorites. So it was really, the shade was worse in that cooler season in the winter
Yes,
time.
and when we started planting things in the sunnier area north of there and planting the same things in that shady area, the difference was really obvious, which you might not, if you have partial shade in your garden, in your yard, you don't really recognize how much different it is for growing in the full sun. It really makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll still grow, but they just are not as big or as full.
Yeah.
If we cut the blooms off now of the anise hyssop, will it keep going, like deadheading?
Yeah, it should.
Okay.
Mhm.
Let's see. We answered that one. I think we got all of the questions. Does anyone else? What we got? We got some questions.
I got one, and I'm going to ask it of you, Mark. Can cover
Oh,
crops
no.
be planted on lawn where in the winter? Part of my lawn is mostly weeds over the cool season.
So, sorry, I missed the first part. Say it again.
Can you plant cover crops over your lawn over the cool season?
Well, sure. It depends on what you want, but a lot of people do put annual rye. That's one of the things you often see people putting out into the, when their grass goes dormant, they put that out. The only
While you're saying that, there's two kinds of rye. There's annual rye, which is ryegrass, and then there's cereal rye. And the rye that you grow as a cover crop in gardens usually is the cereal rye.
Mhm.
that was
But
the
annual
rye in
rye,
your picture.
yeah.
Yeah. So the one concern, and so you could use buckwheat is more of a warm season. Clovers maybe could be, incorporated into a lawn. The only concern that you have, no matter what kind of other kind of cover you put on there, is if you want your grass to do well, when you have to kind of balance, how much the nutrients from the cover crop are going to either take or add when your grass comes out. So like with annual ryegrass, the recommendation is like just before that grass starts to flush out and grow in the spring, you want to kind of mow that cover of rye down very short so that it doesn't actually outcompete your lawn grass. So it depends, if you want your lawn grass to be very healthy, you may just want to leave it alone or kind of very, carefully manage it. If you don't care so much about it, then, sure, throw in some clovers, throw in perennial peanut, and you'll just have a mix. Throw in sunshine mimosa.
Or grow something like perennial peanut instead of grass to begin with, and then you don't have to worry about it.
But perennial peanut does have a dormant season too, and that's when.
Yeah, it does. I've seen crimson clover growing along the roadside, and then subsequently there will be grass there, but it's not like they don't curry their grass isn't like lawn grass. There may be weeds. It's green, let's put it that way, after the crimson clover. If it's green, mow it, right?
Yeah. And they actually, for those roadsides, they want to maintain that vegetative cover. So a lot of their mixes, when they put seed out, will be a mix of bahia grass with some clovers in there, so that when the bahia goes dormant in the winter, there's some cover there keeping that soil stable, so there's not erosion.
Right, so there's no erosion, right?
And a crimson clover can get pretty tall, 12 inches tall. So you might want to look at a shorter clover, maybe a Dutch clover. That's that white flowering one. But
My grandmother up north had clover all in her grass, and it would bloom in the spring. It was always beautiful.
Yeah.
I think further up north, people are looking at doing like these clover lawns, almost like or mixing it in with the lawn.
Mm-hmm.
It could potentially work here. It's just we have different grasses than they do up there, so it doesn't work quite. Well, folks, it is 12:02. You have sat with us through Zoom for 2 hours. I think Rachel and Janice did a wonderful job, so let's give them another round of applause.
Thank you.
And I know Rachel will be sending everyone that signed up here a kind of a follow-up email with some more resources. But if you have any questions, you know how to get a hold of us and let us know. And Roberta, is Roberta still here? I'm going to I'll get with Trevor on your grapefruit question because I got some more questions to ask you. But thank you everyone for joining. And we are going on a little bit of a, yes.
I was just saying thank you for checking on my grapefruit.
Okay, no problem, Roberta. We're going on a little bit of a break. So instead of every week, these are going to be every other week now. So we'll start in August, the second Wednesday of August.
First and the third.
The first and the third, my bad. So the first and the third Wednesday of August, September, who knows how much longer. We'll do every other week instead. Just to, we got to catch up on some other things here. So keep up with us on Eventbrite and Facebook or however you find out about it. And as always, let us know if you have questions.
Bye, everybody.